I have not heard
Good.
of anyone, but we'll wait
Maybe on your
2 minutes.
I just read it over and have a few questions. Maybe more than a few. What do I know? Right?
Just a country boy.
Just a country.
Just a country boy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, let's see, first, you didn't get the prior meeting minutes, did you? Hello, Jim. Hey, how are you? How are you? Great.
That's all we did, right?
How are you? You're here. That's always a good sign. Okay, we're gonna hit the budgets first, then we hit the articles. Okay.
Right? I think so. Terry, why don't we get started? I think we're ready to go. Everybody ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Town of Nantucket Finance Committee meeting. I understand that this is being televised, so here we go.
My manners.
I would like to start with any public comment for anything that is not on our agenda. Hearing none, we'll move to discussion and consideration of prior meetings minutes, and that would be for August 23rd. And we did receive those minutes last Wednesday. And any questions on those? And if not, we're ready to take a vote.
I suggest we hold off, Mr. Chairman, if the silence must mean that.
That's fine. We'll hold off till our next meeting.
We still have the Thursday minute,
That's the ones I was talking about.
Oh, yeah,
Yes, sir.
I'm okay with it. Oh, okay.
Oh, we'll hold off. That's fine.
Okay.
So, and committee reports, just one, Tim and I were part of the Budget Ad Hoc Committee meeting earlier today with the chairman and vice chairman of the school committee and chairman of the Board of Selectmen. Patty Ragaveen was there along with Libby and Irene gave a presentation on the revenue and expense forecast for fiscal year 2014 and out years, and it was very informative, and things seem to be moving along. And Irene or Libby, did you want to give any add to that at all? Okay. Any questions on that? All right. And moving along, number 5, the discussion of the revised fiscal year 2013 special town meeting budget for the airport enterprise. And at this point, I would like to turn the floor over to Tom Rafter. You did receive the budget in the packet, and hopefully you had time to look at that. What I'd like to do, first is, Tom, I'd like to introduce everyone, because I'm not sure who you know or who you don't know. Starting on my right, David Worth, Cliff Williams, Tim Savarino, John Tiffany, Julia Lindler, and Jim Kelly.
Hi.
And Matt Fee and Christy Kickham are not in attendance yet, so they may come in later. I see them. I would request that Tom is going to go ahead and give an overview of the budget, and I would like to hold off for questions, at least initially, so Tom to give to go through that presentation. Is that okay? And then we'll open up the questions.
Whatever
Committee.
way you'd like to do it.
I think that's fine. Did you have a question?
Quick question.
Yep.
Is it the same numbers up here that we received hard copy?
There may be slight differences just due to some timing, but where I do have numbers, I have the source there, so we can go out and check and verify those.
Okay. So why don't we do that? Tom will go ahead and give an overview, and then after that, we'll open it up for questions. Tom,
Thank you.
the floor is yours.
Excuse me, I'm just getting used to this computer system here.
Take your time.
What I'd like to do today is speak a little bit about my management philosophy as regard to finances, some of the actual results for 2012, then go through the proposed changes to the budget and overview, look at the revenue expense and some results, then look at a plan for what some of the items that we're looking to change or modify to change some things and pay back the town and some of the money that we owe. And then also just kind of give you a snapshot of some of the trends that we're looking at measuring and how we're doing things and how we look to do it in the future. Essentially, one of the things I prescribe to is Herb Kelleher's theory, and if you don't know Herb Kelleher, he was the CEO for Southwest Airlines for many years, and after several years of profitability, everybody asked what his, secret to success was, and he simply, he had everybody, it was silence and everything. He simply said, I spend less than I take in, and that's, I thought, a very good theory. I also believe in managing, you can only manage what you measure. And while we measure some things at the airport, we need to do, some increased measurements, but we also have to then do some analysis, and we're working on that. I also look at informing, delegating, communicating, getting it down to the staff, communicating with them exactly what their financial responsibilities are, what the budget is, what they have to manage, and, how they can be responsible for those things. So I just wanted to touch on my philosophy going forward and let you know how I deal with these things. This shows budgeted versus actual 2012 results, and as you asked, there may be some slight differences here due to timing, but in the bottom left you can see that this is from Munis, right out of Munis, period 13 FY12 year-to-date budget report. And as you'll see, in revenue, we did better than projected under the revised budget. In expense, we were slightly lower, which is a good thing. However, and it looks like, we were over by $943,000, but there are a number of transfers in or subsidies from general fund and from special revenue. So it brings it down to $1.6 million without some of that subsidy. Now, granted, a number of those things that are in the subsidy were hopefully one-time events, such as a $400,000 settlement. The $762,000 is predominantly unpaid bills. So a lot of those things we're looking to or can easily reduce, if you will. Overview, we've had some challenges in preparing an accurate budget. Historical process has been to post items to accounts that had the money in it rather than actually reflect what the subject matter was. So rather than put it into an account and transfer the funds into it, they would put it into, if you're buying apples, you're taking it out of oranges or something. So we're working to change that. Another big challenge was the revenue was lumped into two general categories, fuel and airport income. So when you look at the document that you have, you're going to see in our income side a group of numbers that are our best estimate as to what that revenue may come into. The larger number that you see as a subtotal there is based on a little bit of history that we do have. So unfortunately, we didn't have the detail broken out, so we couldn't do a historical comparison. In other words, for example, when somebody came in and paid with a credit card, if they paid for their fuel under credit card, they also paid for the landing fees, parking fees, or whatever else was all lumped into one thing. So we couldn't get our hands on the history there. So we did our best in terms of the aggregate and breaking it out. You'll see here that we've reduced payroll significantly and that our actual revenues exceeded projections, as I said earlier. The fuel revenue was moved into a revolving fund. There's good and bad to that. Good news is it should allow us in the future to do our business as needed once the cap is removed. However, the budgeted fuel revenue is driven by the actual fuel expense because of the Department of Revenue restrictions. So what you're going to see in the budget doesn't necessarily reflect what the actual revenue will be. Our actual revenue will come in much higher, or it better. Also, we developed additional line items to more accurately reflect the measure revenue streams. That's what I was talking about earlier with the fuel, how we broke them out, and we can then look at the various parts of our business to see what's performing and what's not. On the expense side and payroll, you'll see in that group a fairly large increase in the maintenance department. That was due to a prior or historical process of posting the holiday pay in the administration. So it's a little bit of a false indicator, and that was now accurately reflected in the administration side. The Barnstable County Retirement System increase of $512,000 into payroll is actually just moving it from an operating account up into the payroll section. So you'll see as we go on, you'll see a reduction in the operating side. And I apologize, I didn't put the detail in here, but there was a significant reduction in payroll of over $400,000, very close to $500,000 over the 2012 number. So we're managing our business with less folks. Into the operating aspect of the expenses, our FBO expenses with the fuel removed was reduced by $22,000, slight reduction in the firefighting and operations segment. Service and maintenance, there's a large change you'll see in new tools and small equipment. That was due to an incorrect posting that took place in 2012. Under building maintenance, you'll see an increase there. We're looking to try to get an HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning contractor, so we added some money in there. The airfield maintenance is for paving. We have some rutting that's taking place and some deteriorated pavement we need to address fairly shortly. And you'll see a line item called environmental noise expense. We're going to be looking at reclassifying that a little bit because truly what it is a system that is used not just for noise monitoring, but it's used in our FBO, it's used in our operations. It's for tracking of aircraft so that we know when the airplanes are coming in, we can prepare for them and that type of thing. We had to add some money in there because we're buying a new system, and it's a slight increase for the first year. Continuing on the operations and the administration side, the utilities have been increased to reflect the net increase in the size of our general administration building. It's about a 7% increase to our net total square footage of facilities that we operate. And it's reflective for about a 7-month period. The police protection services, you'll see a slight change there. It was just changed as per the contract. Professional services, in looking at the history, last year there were a number of items that, again, hopefully they're only one-time items. I don't expect that they'll be happening again this year. So we basically reviewed every piece of that and washed it out and put in what we thought really was necessary. Mileage reimbursement, there was a misposting in there as well. Again, it goes back to there was some posting of something that wasn't correct in there. It should have come out on another count. Under other expenses, the insurance, it may actually come in lower. We're just getting in our prices now, and we've got to do the split with the town to see what ours is in the total share for theirs. The debt service, currently what you'll see in there is a maximum exposure, but should come in much lower. If we go out for debt with additional entities, it will be split accordingly. And then the retirement you'll see was also, that's the number I mentioned earlier, the $512,000. There's 2 line items you'll see in that section that combined move up into the salary and wages. The results, again, payroll is reduced significantly. Our operating costs are up due to some debt service and operation of added facilities, some of the newer facilities we have, the new terminal expansion, the GA building, we put some money in there. And it's key to remember, I think, that the actual results, I shouldn't say may, they will vary significantly from budget, specifically in the fuel revenue. We're limited as to what we're allowed to budget there. But again, that's the strong income for our business, and that's what we're going to be managing very closely. Going forward, some of the things that we're going to be looking to do, increase financial discipline and responsibility. It's changing the culture, changing the mindset as to how we go about our financial approach to operating the airport. I've already begun the process of pushing it down to the managers, making sure they're responsible, making sure they know what their line items are. And, you know, they all now come to me before they even order something and say, can I order this? Do we have money? And what we're going to do is put in a process where finance will intervene before I even get it. They'll have to sign a fund verification type thing saying, yes, there is money before we go out and actually order things. Review of all rates and charges. There's a number of classifications of rates and charges at airports. There is a group called aeronautical charges that is governed by the federal courts and the FAA. And in order to change those, you must have an approved methodology. We're going to be looking at that through our master plan. That's going to take a little while, but more importantly, or more quickly, we're going to be looking at all other fees that are not subject to those things that we can change as in our business. For example, price of fuel, those types of things. A passenger facility charge. This is something that I know is going to be a little contentious with the airlines, but we're going to have to go forward with. And just so you have a little background, the airport capital funding stream primarily comes from what's called Airport Improvement Program money, FAA grants. That system is dwindling quickly, predominantly because of the ancillary revenues that airlines are now charging, they're not being taxed for. So the Transportation Trust Fund for aviation is dropping dramatically. And the only other source that we're going to have to be able to fund our capital projects will be the passenger facility charge. The plan, though, is to institute the passenger facility charge, use that for the debt of the eligible portion of our terminal, and offset some of the debt from the general aviation, general administration building, thereby reducing our overall expenses. And then to the future, looking at PFC-backed bonding if we need to for anything that may be eligible. And again, a philosophical change to the capital management and how we plan things, and focus more on planning, if you will, than building. There have been a number of facilities built at the airport over the past number of years. It's a great thing. They're nice. They're functional. They work very well. But I think we need to pull the throttles back a little bit, look at the planning, and look at what may have future implications. Before we go and plan a facility, we want to make sure we have the operating costs and debt and everything else all lined up. So part of the master plan that we're going to be doing will be a financial plan that will align the capital projects with a financial plan. Just some charts here, and I apologize. I shouldn't apologize. I threw anything up here because what I did is I grabbed what I could in statistics that we have, and I said, what does it mean? What are these things telling us? This is jet fuel sales fiscal year 10 through 13. You can see it's a very, very similar pattern. There is a little bit, there's some growth you can see in the peak months there. But what it's just simply demonstrating is you've got a very strong pattern. You know when you can plan for the jet fuel. This is enplaned passengers. Now, typically at larger commercial airports and most airports, this is a metric that is used for benchmarking. It's, you just have to be careful how you use it, especially in our case. Our enplaned passengers, and you'll see why in a minute when I tie it to another metric here, it's good. Again, you can see it's a very similar pattern to what jet fuel is. So you can tell, when we're busy, when we're not. The objective here is to try to get our enplaned passengers up. Now, the enplaned passenger is important because, again, going back to that AIP funding, it's a formula that's based on number of enplanements that you have. So, and it's also good for general economic benefit. However, we have a different line of business here. We have our enplaned passengers, which I'll call the commercial side, the Island Air, Cape Air, JetBlue, US Air, those folks. But then we have the very strong corporate aviation. You'll see where some differences come into play in a minute. This is avgas fuel sales. Again, similar type pattern. What you're going to see next, though, is a comparison to fuel and passengers. This is the enplaned passengers versus jet fuel. Now, you remember the jet fuel curve, and then down at the bottom we have kind of flattened out enplaned passengers because of the scale. So it's important, if you will, to look at this and say, what does this mean? In the months of July, August, and September, our jet fuel sales, the spread is much greater because of our corporate aviation business. So we're working on identifying exactly what metrics we need to look at to say, is it per operation? Is it per general aviation operation? What I'm trying to get down to is what is the average uplift of fuel in the corporate side of the house so we can tell whether or not we're pricing our product properly. And then we show enplaned passengers versus avgas, which it's interesting to see that they kind of correlate here. There's a direct relationship. Although what you'll see in May and June is the avgas getting ahead of the enplaned passengers. That's not necessarily good for identifying exactly what the airlines are doing in terms of profitability. So these are just some of the metrics I just grabbed quickly, but I just wanted to let you know that we're starting to implement and institute measurements that we can use as analysis to say, how are we performing? What is the airline doing? Are the airlines making money? We have to make sure they're making money. So I just wanted to show you some of the trends, some of the things that we're looking at in terms of a snapshot. We certainly don't have it all together yet, but we're pulling it and culling it together and going out and changing some of our reporting to get the data we need to. And with that, I'll be glad to take questions.
Thank you very much.
Can I make a couple of additional comments?
Sure.
One thing on the expense budget that you should understand is that the amount of fuel that this allows us to purchase, assuming a certain price, is about 90,000 gallons less than we actually sold last year, fiscal year 12. So if everything goes according to plan, we are going to have to go back again to the annual town meeting and get the budget adjusted once more to allow us to buy that fuel, which we will need primarily in the month of June. And it's important that people understand that. So we'll have to come back to the well again in that sense. As you understand, but I think I wanted to make clear, the fuel revenue, net revenue number that appears on the front page and inside is essentially a plug number. It's a number that bridges the gap between other revenues and the maximum revenue that we're allowed to budget. So again, going back to what Mr. Rafter said, we are, especially since we have a good part of the year already behind us effectively, we expect that number will in actuality increase. Just a couple of comments on the planning to follow through. We have adopted a schedule where it's going to take us about 1.5 years to get these plans done, the master plan and the financial plan. They require the services of a consultant. We have a certain amount of money available this fiscal year. We'll get more from the federal government to do this. They support this effort next year. But unfortunately, it means that the process is going to be somewhat slower than all of us would like. So we hope to have all the objectives identified by the end of this year, the end of this fiscal year, and move into the actual development of both the master plan and the financial plan going forward from there. And on the capital projects, the FAA really is not going to fund any more capital projects or commit to any more until after this master plan is in place.
Thank you. Why don't we open up for questions? And any questions from the committee? Jim?
Thank you for your comments, and I'm not going to ask a detailed question about the changes in the expenses, but since you opened with kind of your management philosophy and a description of your business, I just had a general question. And I understand that you've got the opportunity to improve revenue through, fee increases, charge increases, renegotiating leases with tenants and those kinds of things. But are there more like traditional business development opportunities as you because I don't know your business, but
Yes.
Are there things, and I don't, are there things like just my knowledge of other FBOs in the country, they offer other kinds of services, and are there other things that you've
There are
thinking
other
about
things.
that might grow revenue that you're not currently doing?
Absolutely. And that is a very significant and different part of the operation of this particular airport. There is some room in the FBO. We're looking at various things there, specifically in our new building. But there's other, if you will, diversified revenues. Our land use out on Bunker Road. We are looking into, there was an RFP issued previously, and there were proposals submitted. We have folks that are interested in more land out there. Those types of things diversify the revenue streams are what we're looking to do, as well as, and going back to the expense, consolidating our operation. So yes, we're looking at all aspects of it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Further questions? John?
Yeah, Irene, along that same question, this is,
John, because it's televised, can you pull your mic down?
what?
Pull the mic right down.
Speaking to the mic, John.
Can't hear me, eh?
Thank you, Bobby. Speaking to the mic.
When, as I understand it, when we look at the budget, we can only budget based on what our revenue was the previous year. You're talking about some of these new initiatives, which I wholeheartedly support your investigation of. That's going to be kind of interesting to see if you start to do some of this stuff, because we're going to be having a budget here, and then you're going to have, hopefully, a revenue stream that is not even listed here, could be. And so we could have say, a large possibility of exceeding our revenue in actuality over the budget, never mind on the things that we've already predicted, but in some new things as well.
That's my goal.
So you're going to have to keep track of that, and I think we probably want to be seeing some of that. When we look at the next year's budget, we probably want to be looking at some of that as it occurs coming up into this next budget sessions.
And that's why we look to break out the revenue in various areas so that we can measure those, various lines of business, various aspects of the line of business, if you will. And you're absolutely right, and I hope that I'm back here with a problem like that. That's my goal.
Nice problem.
We need to exceed the revenues, and we need, although we may not be able to get our hands on it for another year, so that's fine. Let me get the ball rolling, and, I'd like to have that problem.
But that will be reported when we look out into 2014. You may have some things that are being reported that aren't even in the budget as far as line items are concerned.
Correct. You'll probably see new added line items. You'll also see a breakout by cost center. So you'll actually be able to see each individual division of the airport separately. That's something we're working on. As well as we're going to track monthly what our projection is for the month, as well as where it comes in at. So Tom and I are definitely partnering on that.
Good.
Okay.
Good, thank you. Further questions?
Hi, Tom. I'm wondering, how comfortable are you with the contracts that you've uncovered? Are you comfortable that everything has been uncovered?
Oh, no. No, I don't know that everything has been uncovered. I don't know that everything that has been uncovered has been, if you will, normalized, resolved. We need to do some of that. But I'm comfortable that we've got the major ones behind us. There are still some items out there that we need to address. And some of it's going to require some legal, investigation to look at it, whatever. But I think that everything is more to the good, if you will. As we uncover it, it's, we're getting things in line where people need to just, if they have a contract for X amount, they have to pay it. And that's what's happening, so.
Dave, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Would you mind putting your numbers back up here so we're talking about if I can? And if I run on, please stop me. So.
Okay.
He's good at that.
Have my permission. Yeah, just take it back. Okay. So, help me reconcile here on the sheet that was sent out, which is why I was asking if these were updated. You're showing actual 2012 fiscal year revenue of nominally $10 million on this, and we're showing actual revenue for 2012, if I'm reading this correctly, of $15 million.
Is that the
So-
fuel?
No, the difference there with the revenue is it's going to show transfers in. So the 10,046 does not include any of those other sources, the general fund special revenue, general, and the one at the very bottom for unpaid bills. We also updated this chart as of June 30 that you're looking at for 2012. We have just finished the audit adjustments as of September 1st, so I can go back and reconcile these with Tom.
Yeah, but this says as of the 13th of September, so I'm assuming they...
For the 2013 is what we've been working on. We haven't gone backwards into 2012 yet.
Just to slow down then, so the $10,046,000, that's going to be adjusted? That's not the actual number right now?
We'll review it together. That was as of June 30, unaudited number.
Okay.
So if you made any adjustments to the ledgers since June 30 to September 1st for your reporting to the auditors and Department of Revenue, it may change, and in this case it
Okay.
did.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to continue to that?
Yeah, I
Deb?
do.
Okay.
So the fact that it says as of the 13th, what numbers here are as of the 13th?
The 2013 STM revised budget number.
So the second question, and maybe it's a matter of form, but why would you include transfers as revenue? I mean, it would be,
Yep.
the equivalent of me going out and borrowing money from the bank for my business and then saying it was revenue that year.
For governmental accounting, all items are shown as an other revenue source or revenue. When you run the report, it's an account 40,000. That's UMass standard accounting for the state of Massachusetts. Typically, we break that apart so that we show it under the line item. But if you were to run a straight report out at Munis and looked at category 4, it would include everything, including all transfers.
Okay, so I get that, but on an operational basis, you would have to strip that out. If you really want to understand what the airport's operating at, on an operating income basis, you have to take out any of the transfers. They're just.
Correct, and that's typically what we do.
So is that the $10 million that we're looking at?
That was a $10 million. That's why I'm going to go back and look at the 15 to see if it included all those transfers. I don't have a Munis printout with me tonight to answer your question specifically.
Okay. And then on the expense, it's sort of the same question. It looks like the actual expense number is running $1 million higher
Yep.
here than what it is on the page 1 of the information that was sent out. I mean, I've got a $13,165,000.
Yeah.
Yes, and we'll look back into that as well.
So maybe I'm missing something, and Mr. Chairman, you can help me here, but I'm not sure how we can make a decision about this if we don't have numbers that, or we have a variety of different numbers and we don't have an agreement as to what those numbers ought to be.
I agree.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
Tom was able to present this slide today. He produced it today. I've been in meetings all day. I haven't had the opportunity to get back to my desk to run a Munis report. Like I said, when it comes to 2012, that's the audit. When it comes to 2013 and looking at your special town meeting budget forward, it's based upon the revenues you brought in as of June 30th, and that's the report that goes to the Department of Revenue.
I think that that's an important distinction.
Correct.
So when it comes to the actual numbers for 2012, they're really not actual until after the audit.
Correct, and that'll be final November 1st, so it's actually quite common for it to change in the 3 months after the close of the
Okay. That makes
fiscal
sense.
calendar.
The revised fiscal year 2013 numbers are the numbers that are reflecting the budget being made under the constraints of state regulations.
Correct, the physical revenue dollars does not include any transfers.
Does everybody understand that? I want to be sure, because that has been confusing me for 9 months. I want to be sure that everybody understands that here, the table, and in the audience, but does that make sense?
I'm confused.
Okay, then what, what I would ask is
Something
just,
else, a little more to your question.
okay,
I would prefer to have a hard close every month. That's not doable, and certainly not in the municipal section. If we could do it quarterly, it'd be wonderful. But that's why we're going to develop our own management reports that kind of get it closer to that. And we sit down once a week now, and we work to make sure we're reconciling those numbers. So going to your point, absolutely, I need to have more accurate, up-to-date information that I know which way the ship's going. And that's what we're working on separately as management reports.
And we can't have a hard close because we don't have the infrastructure to do it? We don't have the talent and capability to do it?
It's strictly timing. It's if turnovers come to us and credit card batches are batched out on June 30 and they're not turned over downtown until the following Tuesday or Wednesday, it now books into the new fiscal year. So you're adjusting
Okay, but
backwards.
Can't you make those adjustments? I mean,
That's
total
what-
versus cash. Can't you make an
That's what
adjustment
we're
on
doing,
that?
sir. That's what we're doing, and I'll make sure you get an update.
and I think also to add to that is that past practices were not conducive to a synergy that exists right now. So the numbers, and my understanding, again, if I'm wrong, please, is that it was, in previous years, it wasn't possible for us to get these numbers to this detail, and as Tom alluded to before. But I do see that we have a ways to go. And from where I sit, and just from working with you both, is that steps are being made to go forward.
To get them
But
in alignment, yes.
To get in line. But I really want to stress is, because there is confusion here, is that when it comes to the numbers that we will be voting on for fiscal year 2013, that specter of the state hangs over us all. So actual numbers that are coming in are not reflective of the numbers that we actually have to turn into the state to certify our budget. Is that correct?
Correct.
And in your experience, what kind of delta would we have here in variance? I mean, is it a couple of percent? Or is it 33%?
In the past, when we went to the Department of Revenue with forecasts, we had the ability to forecast revenues based on trends or up or down a maximum 10%. When the recession hit in 2009, all that stopped. There is no flexibility when you're budgeting revenue anymore.
And I understand that, but, you know, if we're waiting on an audit, what's your experience in the adjustments that the auditors will make to what you think the numbers are? I mean, you've got a preliminary, it sounds now like the number that you call actual fiscal year 2012 is really an unaudited, your estimate. What would you normally expect the auditors to, how much of an adjustment are they going to make? Is it going to be a couple of percent?
With the airport, it's ranged dramatically over the past 6 years. This is probably the closest it's been in those years. Typically, the auditors would make adjustments all the way up to the final audit being produced December 31st. DOR requires all reporting in October 31st. So that's why...
What's the percentage? That's all. I'm just trying to get a gauge of how close or how far away these numbers are.
I understand your question. And again, I don't have the reports in front of me to give that to you tonight. It's something I'll bring back to you in the committee as well.
Thank you. John? And then Jim.
I guess this is, I'm not sure who can answer this question. You know, am I to understand that the numbers that we're going to be looking at for the special town meeting have yet to come?
No, I think we're referring back to the actual performance from 2012, not going forward for the budget. I'm sorry.
Well, it's hard to analyze what the budget for 2013 is if we don't have a hard number for the projected for the 2012.
If I can, the best I could do for that, I sat and I went through every line item on the expense side, line by line, looked at the history, looked at the purchases, looked what was done, you know, what could be removed, and there's very little shifting in any of them. That's on the expense side. The revenue side, I don't know what to tell you on that one, other than I wasn't here for much of it.
I'm sorry.
I'm just struggling a little. Maybe Jim can answer my question.
Actually, real quick, John, what the Department of Revenue looks for the revenue you can project for your 2013 budget is your revenue on June 30. So what you have in here in your document was as of June 30. That's what's reported to DOR. All the audit adjustments occur during the back end 6 months of the new fiscal year. So that's why the revenue projection that we have for you today matches very closely to your 2012 actual revenue as of June 30.
Yeah, I know what this says. The problem is when you look it up here and then you start to say, okay, where are we? And I'm just trying to, again, maybe I haven't heard, or maybe I'm not listening carefully enough, but I'm just not quite sure how we're going to proceed here.
For 13, what you have for revenue and the budget you have before you, Tom and I are in agreement that it needs to go forward as is, unless you have some changes. The audit figures, there's always adjustments after June 30 as you go through your audit process. That doesn't mean you go and you wait for your audit to be final to have a special town meeting before you try and get a tax rate set, because you can't have the two happening at the same time. That's why the Department of Revenue requires us to run reports at the close of business on the physical day of June 30 and report those as the revenue numbers and the expense numbers. Any adjustments that come thereafter, they receive in the audit as audit adjustments.
These are the numbers.
These are the numbers that are being submitted to DOR.
2013. Jim?
So, two questions. This column here, starting with the $6,744,000, that's what's going to appear in our motion?
Yes, that's what's going to show as revenue.
So, I mean, these are the numbers that are going to appear in our motion, and I just kind of, just for my own kind of self-discipline, I mean, the reason we're doing this is because we've got some new information. We have to do this at a special town meeting. This isn't our usual rigor of going through line by line of the airport budget. We get a crack at that for the annual town meeting. So I'm comfortable with the level of, general nature of these numbers for now, personally.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Me too.
Also, when we come back for annual town meeting, you'll have monthly updates from Tom and I all the way through. So we'll have a much cleaner projection going into
I just was trying to bring
14.
us back to what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
Thank you. And I guess then I'll try to alter that too, and then we'll open up to the audience. When the audit is completed, we will get the fiscally actual 2012 numbers done, so that might answer your question. Correct? Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Oh, Cliff.
About 6 months ago, we sat right here while Michael Daly gave a pretty scathing report from the airport and its bookkeeping. What have we changed as far as people putting it up at the airport and reducing it? I know Peter Lamb was out there for years, and he didn't have much good to say about it. So,
Well,
in my opinion.
In the past, you also didn't have direct communication between your finance department and your airport manager and his support staff within finance. Tom and I meet weekly. We're looking at all things financial, all kinds of questions that may arise, concerns. And Tom's looking into the detail as well as Ashley. If either has a concern, they let me know, and then Martin and I research it as well. It's a much closer-knit group. There's communications a few times during the week, whereas before it was only during the audit process, and it was with Peter Lamb.
okay. Does that answer your question? Okay. David, do you have a question?
Yeah, just on the, or we do reimbursements from any of the, from FAA and whatnot that would help defray the capital expenditures that we've made? We got all our grant requests in and all of that, or is there a schedule of?
It's a continuous process where they'll continue to come in. As Dan mentioned earlier, we have FAA on board with the master plan. There's about $225,000 left in our entitlement funding for that will take us through May, and that's the cycle when they issue grants again.
And those grants can be applied against capital expenditures that have already been made, or is that?
No,
forward?
it's for going forward for
So the
projects.
books are all closed on all the
But-
stuff that's been,
No, the passenger facility charge is something that you can take backwards.
but no, for just the, the capital expansion.
I wouldn't say they're closed, they're still open, there's some that are still active that are happening.
And so there's money that's still available?
I believe, yeah, there's still some out there for some of the projects.
Excuse me, those are netted out in the debt service calculations.
That was where I was going with my.
What occurs is we do grant anticipation notes because it is a reimbursement program, and they're done short-term. So as we receive those grant receipts, we reduce the amount that we need short-term. Therefore, you're only taking the long-term portion attributed to the airport portion of the expense long-term. So I believe there is about 3 or 4 still out there.
And am I correct that we basically have $1 million structural deficit?
I think structural is a little bit too strong at this point. Tom is still researching out. And again, you can jump in on this. I think the way you're lining things up, I think calling it structural would be a little premature.
And I believe there's a term of art for structural within the laws, if you will, of the finance group. So I don't particularly look at it as a structural. From an operating, if you will, actual deficit, I think it's much lower, or, well, let's put it this way. I have a goal to prove Irene wrong. She has a number, I have a different number. So I'd like to get it to 0 so we're both happy at some time. That's our goal, but yes, it's much lower than it should be, or it should be much less than $1 million.
Tim?
Oh, Tom, I would just like to thank you for your cooperation and the work. And I know, Dan, you've dug in and worked hard on this. I'm not surprised the numbers for 12 and 13 are changing. Those of us that have been on the committee for a long time have been trying to get numbers out of the airport for a long time with not much success. And John, I think you can attest. I think that as we start to uncover and those of us that have been reading the paper for the last 12 months or so realize that there's been a lot of things that no one knew out there, and as you take the lid off of it and try to figure it out and correct it, I applaud the work that you're doing, all of you, and trying to get us on solid footing. And I look forward to the day when the numbers are solid. And it appears to me if we move forward on and getting this special town meeting behind us, that we'll have a set of numbers that from here forward we can depend on and go.
And what we are looking to do, Irene and I are looking at putting a plan together, maybe before we start special town, but certainly after special town meeting. What's the plan going to be for payback? What's the plan going to be for turning it around and making it self-sufficient? And then what's the plan beyond that? What do we do with it? Do we set aside for certain things, those types of things?
I'd like to open up to the audience right now. Bobby, you had your hand up? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a couple of comments as a member of the Board of Selectmen, and to all of you on the FinCom, the new members especially, David, and the other members. This problem didn't happen overnight. This problem came to a head in the last year, 6 months. The reality is the solution is not going to happen overnight either. The Airport Commission, the airport manager, Irene, have been working very diligently on this, but the reality is that Irene also has a town finance that she has to deal with as well. And she's spent an enormous amount of time working on this. This is not going to be fixed tomorrow or the next day. It may take a year, two, maybe even longer. I feel everyone's frustration with this, especially with the numbers and nailing them down. But the reality is that it's not going to happen right away. There is a deficit that we have to forecast in the town budget, and we may have to forecast this out years in advance. Hopefully, we won't have to take that general fund subsidy every year. But when we do financial budgets, as you know,
Right.
we have to put that in there. We can't come up with the money later on. It has to be in the forecast. So the taxpayers of the town and everyone needs to understand that we're going to have to do this for probably the next 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years in our budget. Hopefully that at the end of the year, that money won't all have to be spent in the airport, and it can go back into free cash, and we can use it for other things, capital improvements, things of that nature. But this is the reality that we're stuck with. And Dan has done a phenomenal job in the new Airport Commission, and Tom, the new management, and the cooperation that I see from the 2 years, year and a half that I've been on the selectmen between the finance department, town administration, the airport, was never there before. So, and you all know, especially some of you longstanding members on the FinCom. So, we're all going to get frustrated, but we have to take a deep breath and realize that things are getting better, and we're going to work through this. So I just want to make that general comment so that the public that's watching this at home doesn't get frustrated and go, what the heck's going on? Because we are making it better. So. Thank you.
Before another question, you mentioned about forecasting years out for a subsidy for the airport. Would you want to expound upon that a little bit, just so the committee understands exactly what that means, and that the good news is that things get better, that just echoing what Bobby said, that it will go back into something else?
Sure. Once you know that you have to provide, or even forecast that you need to provide a subsidy to an enterprise fund, typically for forecasting purposes, you assume that that's going to carry forward until proven otherwise. So as we go through the process and things start cleaning up, panning out, Tom's able to put many new revenue initiatives in, we can reduce that subsidy and then reduce it in the out years. But until you have a plan in place and you start looking at that and how you're going to achieve it, it's premature to change your forecast. So you basically take your forecast, you assume all those costs are going to be there going into your out years, and then as it changes, you're able to move it into the other areas of the general fund. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it helps. Is
Great.
that,
Thank you.
questions from the committee on this point? John?
At what point?
What I explained about that subsidy for the airport in years out. No. Okay, no questions.
I have
Okay,
a
thank
question
you.
for them.
All right, well, Cliff was first, and then you're next. Cliff.
Bobby made the point how much work Irene's done, and obviously how complicated the airport is. Considering that we found Tom, he's well-qualified. Do we need another well-qualified accountant or financial person at the airport? I mean, we've gone quite some time now. So is that not a reality?
I think we have someone in place right now that is very competent.
Okay.
Ashley Christ, who is here tonight, as a matter of fact.
Welcome.
She has stepped up to the plate and jumped in, and she's swimming every day, trying to get her head above water, because there's a lot of work there, but she's doing a tremendous job, a yeoman's job of just taking the bull by the horns and getting things, done, and with the help of Irene and her staff and Martin and those. So I think we have a fully competent finance person.
John?
I'm sorry, I would just agree. As Ashley learns more and more, less of my time and my time of the staff is needed, so she's doing an amazing job.
Great. Good to hear that. John?
Yeah, I've got 2 points. The first point is that I don't think our job is to be comfortable when we see things that are uncomfortable. And I think that's and so I for one don't plan to be comfortable going into the future until we can answer a lot of these questions that seem to be up in the air right now. Now, the second thing, Tom, I'm getting when I went through the numbers and then I saw your numbers and I understand the difference, it would tell me these numbers say we've got a structural deficit of $1 million. Your numbers up there are saying, well, never mind, that's the budget, and we've got reasons that we've got to construct the budget a certain way. But I have the impression, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, that at the end of the year, at the end of the fiscal year, that what I see up here tells me that we don't have a structural deficit, even at this point, of $1 million. It's something less than that. That's a question.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Is the structural there's a structural deficit in here that we're looking at.
Yes.
What I'm trying to get an understanding of is just,
Why would it be less?
yeah,
A few different things, I think. There are certainly the revenue alone. The revenue is not what is projected to be as actual, and there's a lot of money in our fuel there. The additional revenue that we may see from other income streams, as was said earlier, looking at diversifying, that type of thing.
Okay.
And while I looked at every line item account in terms of expense to see what was in there to make sure it was appropriate, I don't have the metrics to say, is it appropriate and is it industry standard?
Yeah.
Meaning, are we spending too much for X, Y, or Z or whatever? I need to do some comparisons and say, why is this out of line or whatever? So while I see it as being a need, if you will, to operate the airport, I need to make sure it's in line with other benchmarks throughout the industry.
Yeah.
So, and I believe there's some savings there. And there's one, honestly, off the top of my head, I forget what it is, but there was one that was a fairly good size that I think it's a wait and see as it comes in. But we just have to manage what we have, manage according to what we have coming in. As I said, back to Herb Kelleher. Even if it's not coming in, if our fuel all of a sudden dries up or something, we have to address it accordingly. I've already talked to our staff about contingency planning. I said, you need to be prepared for it. Not only are you going to have to manage your budget, but what happens if? Look at the other things. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but
it gives me a feel.
okay.
The last item around that is the expense budget. You mentioned about revenue and looking at different sources of revenue. Is there different things in the expense side of the operation that you think you have an opportunity to improve upon?
Well, I think there's some, but there's also on the other side, there are some things that are not in the expense that we're going to have to make work. Some of the associated costs possibly with this new facility. Again, I got to see what it comes in at. We don't have anything necessarily budgeted in terms of janitorial supplies or manpower. We're going to try to make that work within our means that we have today. Again, we're going to have a partial year this year, but we're going to have to look at the actual performance. That's where I go back to the measurements. What is that building going to cost us? What does it actually cost us once we open it? So, and going towards revenue. I mean, we're looking at possibility of maybe generating some additional revenue through that building from other sources that we may have. So I wish I could say I could give you the exact numbers and say, this is why I think it's going to be less and by how
no,
much. Our goal after this is to have, a sit down and come up with a plan and
Yeah.
wash everything out completely. But I have to tell you, it was challenging just getting this far. When you go back and look at some of the history and you see what, in some of the accounts, it's kind of.
Yeah, you're dealing with a lot of it.
All set?
I just have one last question. I can either answer it now or later.
It's the last one. Do it
Okay.
now.
Can I assume that there's going to be no change in the capital? What we're seeing here is the operational budget, but we don't have any, there's nothing that we're looking at around the capital, so I'm assuming there's no change in what was, what we-
There may be some changes in capital next week. We didn't bring that to you tonight. What we need to still look at is there any borrowing that occurred that wasn't fully expended? Say if there was a 10-year project and you borrowed $250,000 long-term but only spent $70,000, and we're already paying debt on it, let's reappropriate the balance. So that's what you're going to see when we come back to discuss capital. Rough numbers, about $400,000 would be needed for the GA building. If it's all borrowing, that's already assumed in this operating budget that you're looking at. If we're able to reduce that, we will. The other item, I believe, was parking lot improvements, and the third and last item was furnishings for the GA building. It wasn't in the, my understanding, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't included in the original forecast for that building. So you could have a pilot's room, but no furniture. So that's something that would come back, and we'd be looking to reappropriate from old articles for those.
Further questions? Tim?
Tom, I don't know if today's the right day. We're trying to pin down our October special town meeting, but I would love at a future meeting, maybe you want to give a quick comment, how the consolidation, moving from the airport's operating system to Munis, and how you're handling that, and how that's going, and also as we move maybe to a single auditor rather than multiple audits. I mean, I can.
Well, to first address your question about the two different systems, I think there may still be two different systems. The one would be used more for a management tool. And again, it's kind of like your checkbook. You've got your checkbook, you have the bank who's doing their financing, and then you may have it dumped into like a QuickBooks or something. This, again, is something that we can use internally for management reports to do various analysis that we may not have the capability of doing through the Munis system. However, what we are doing is we're switching over, if you will, to the Munis driving things and getting that in alignment and getting it in a more timely fashion, if you will. So I don't know if that addressed there was a second part to that question, I apologize.
Well, and if you could just make a quick comment on the multiple audits and the confusion that may cause.
I think we may be able to get away possibly from one of the audits, but we do have a need for an individual audit for the FAA too. But we should be able to get that in alignment with what's required for the town, because specifically, it's going to be very important when the airport does generate revenue, paying back the town, the FAA is going to have a level of assurance that it was accounted for appropriately. So that's why it's key that we do integrate those two. And I think we can do that as long as it meets FAA muster, and I don't see a problem with that. I've seen it done before, so.
It was always perplexing to me, all the money that we spend as a community on audits and all the problems that we've uncovered at the airport, and none of them were uncovered by the auditors. And so
that would be a
troubling.
Concern to me, too.
We're moving on. Further questions from the audience? All right, Tom, thank you very much. This was
Thank
a
you.
very illuminating presentation.
Mr. Chairman?
John?
Are we going to get a copy of that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Town board had that. I mean, that was already, and I will follow through that. God bless you. I'll follow through with that. Okay. All righty. So we'll move on with our agenda for the discussion of the revised fiscal year 2000 special town meeting budget for solid waste enterprise and also sewer enterprise. This is Kara. That's it. Hi, Kara. Do you know everybody on the committee?
All but the new members.
Oh, you'll need to just To my far right is David Worth. And the young lady there is Julia Lindler. And this is Kara, who's the department head for the DPW and responsible for solid waste, sewer, and public works.
Yes.
So thank you, and take it away.
Moving forward to special town meeting, there are two opposite problems with the sewer and the solid waste. So I thought I would start with the solid waste, since that's a good problem to have. We have collected through landfill fee income and tipping fees an additional $189,000, almost $200,000 beyond what was budgeted. And in order to balance the account for setting the tax rate, we need to be able to put that into the budget.
Okay.
And in discussions with Irene, what we've decided to do is to create a fund to put unallocated contingency funds into, and it would be placed there.
And I guess, can I ask a question on that? So will that unallocated fund, will that have to be transferred for the spring trip?
Well, what's going to happen is
No, you're saying no. Okay.
we haven't had the audit completed yet.
Okay.
And it will close to retained earnings,
Okay.
hopefully.
Thank you. Oh, what's the deal?
You got to think of a more creative way of calling it rather than unallocated expense. We got to think of a better word than that. Just joking.
Thank you. Continue.
Was there any more questions? I could go to sewer.
For solid waste, no, if you're all set. Any questions from the committee on solid waste?
Pretty,
I think that's pretty straightforward for me.
Sewer side, we have the opposite side of the coin, where there's a $500,000 deficit. And in order to be able to balance the fund to set the tax rate, we've made deductions in a variety of line items to a total to equal the reduced amount.
Okay. You have a question, Joe?
no question.
Oh, good. Okay.
Just a lot of questions in my mind, but nothing of the.
Are there any questions from members of the committee? David?
One quick, do we have a problem with people paying their sewer bills? And do we run a big, I'd call it accounts receivable? Or do people-
No. No, it's collected through the water.
Yeah, but if you're
Water
not
company,
on,
water.
if you're not on water, but you're on sewer, which I think people, there are some people that certainly are.
It's one bill. Those that have just water get the water bill. Those that have water and sewer get the water and sewer bill.
What if you have sewer but not water? Okay. Okay, thanks.
You don't.
Okay, any questions from the audience? Thanks, Kara. I like that. Moving on, then, continue our discussion for articles for a special town meeting. We all have a copy of the warrant. There is nothing that's specifically on the agenda today, so I will open it up to any questions or discussion that the committee may want to have on these articles. And I do see a couple of sponsors for the HCC article and for the Connecticut wind turbine article are in the audience here. Any discussion at all? Okay, now we will be hearing each of these articles a week from today at the public hearing, so I don't think that we are done yet. But hearing none, we can move on to the discussion of the Division of Local Services report. And again, that was the report that the State Department of Revenue compiled, or interviewed and compiled, with suggestions for changes and improvements to how the town does business in certain areas. And specifically, our discussion was they made some recommendations for the Finance Committee. And does anybody have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'd like to, just to back up
Which one?
a second, back to the citizen town articles.
Okay, let's go back that. Yeah.
Well, the question I have of you
Oh, please.
is that we are expecting some additional information, and I'm just,
Let me try to give a timeline on, and the additional information that we would be expecting, it really comes from two articles. One is the Mattocket Wind Turbine article, and the other is the Historic District Commission changes. And as for the Mattocket Wind Turbine, I have talked with the sponsor, Ms. Gookin, and had asked if we could receive a financial estimate or pro forma by Wednesday of this week that I will turn over to Irene to work the numbers, and we will then get a more detailed sheet for analysis. And as for the HDC, I don't believe we have any timeline. I have been in touch with town council and have not heard back, so I don't have an answer on that for you, if and when we will get more information on it.
okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
And when I get it,
Yeah.
I will get it on it.
The key is, I think it's Monday, or is it?
Public hearing on Monday, the 24th.
Yeah, and that's a key date,
Yes, it is.
which would be, if we're going to get information, it would be nice to get it like on Friday or even Thursday of this week. And that's sort of getting
Well,
the oar in the water and saying, because the last thing we want to do is go into that not being able to look at whatever is available.
I would agree. And that is why I have requested specifically Ms. Gookin if we can get it on Wednesday, so that we can turn around as soon. I hear what you're saying, and I sympathize, and I'll try to.
Okay.
And Mr. Barr?
I was just wondering if something does come in related to the HDC article from town council.
Yes.
That might benefit my being able to respond on Monday.
You would certainly, you're on the list. Yes, sir. As we talked about, yes. If and when something comes in, we're right on it. Okay. Does that answer your question on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, while we're still on discussion of articles, any article, does anyone wants to discuss, now is the time to do it. Or, like I said, we'll be coming back on the public hearing and afterwards to vote our motions, so. Okay. And then going, Tim, sorry.
I was just going to ask for draft motions. Do we have any this week? Because that would kind of hone us in on, maybe we could click off some of the ones that are pretty routine. Okay. That would help a lot.
It would.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming we'll get those, you said this week, I was assuming we get those by Monday? Okay. Any other discussion on that? All right. And then going back to the discussion of Division of Local Services, any comments on that report at this time?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd just
Please,
make a
Tim.
comment.
Go ahead.
This is kind of a placeholder that we
It
had
has been.
we had a very preliminary discussion about that report back in July.
Right.
And I had asked for this to be an ongoing agenda item so that we could have the ability to dig into it a little further at some point. I'm not saying tonight's the right night, but I just wanted to give the history of why it's here.
Sure, well, and it will continue to be a placeholder then. I'm okay with that. John?
Does everybody have a copy of this?
I think so. Everybody should. I'll send it out again. I believe I even sent you a copy last week.
Okay.
Yeah, I think everybody does.
Everybody's, I just wanted to.
Yes. And it was sent out July 20th to everybody. We can certainly hold off and give you the placeholder, that's fine. Because Tim is absolutely correct. This is still on here, so I have the ability to talk about it if and when we feel we need to, for right now. Okay. And if hearing no comments on that, then the date of our next meeting is Monday, September 24th, 4 o'clock, right here for the public hearing. And that is, again, the opportunity for the public to give comment on all the articles that are here. And the planning board is voting on the motions tonight, So they're going to get there wrapped up, and hopefully we'll have our wrapped up by end of next week. So hearing nothing else, I'll ask for a motion for adjournment. Second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Everybody have a nice evening, a nice week. Thank you all for coming.
Hey, that's not Reno. What? What we heard today. That basically, I thought, he's just going line.
Okay, great.
We're a lot further ahead.